This is an overview of a data analysis checklist I created to help you consider relevant points and record important information when doing an analysis. These ideas come from several sources. Some of them are outside the scope of this course, so we will only touch on them lightly, but I wanted to present to you a comprehensive view of how data analyses are used in context, so you can keep this in mind as we learn about statistical concepts this semester. Hopefully the statistics you calculate are more than just a collection of random facts about the data you have. Most of the time, individuals and organizations are seeking to answer a question or solve a problem using statistical data. As such, the statistics you calculate should be part of the supporting evidence of a well-crafted argument. We won't cover how to craft an argument this semester, but you can learn more in the book by Booth et al. Listed in the references at the end of this presentation. Validity is an overarching concern of science and refers to the level of truth we ascribe to inferences. The purpose of this checklist is to help you gather information relevant to establishing the validity of the inferences you seek to make with the statistics you calculate. The answers you provide to the prompts in this checklist about how your data were collected and the characteristics of your data set are the logical foundation upon which any arguments you seek to make with the results of your analyses rest. There is a code of ethics published by the American Statistical Association. Ensuring the integrity of your data and your analysis is part of ethical statistical practice. Background information such as that covered in this checklist should not be overlooked when conducting and interpreting statistical analyses. You can find copies of the checklist in my GitHub repository listed in the footnote of this slide. The checklist has three main sections. The first section deals with information about the overall design and purpose of the study. If we compare a study to a building, information about the research questions and study design are like the foundation footings of a building. This information defines the scope and boundaries of a study and, if done properly, provide a stable structure for further work. The second section deals with characteristics of the data set and what steps are taken to manage those characteristics in the analysis. Finally, the third section deals with choosing and conducting statistical tests. The validity of the inferences drawn from these tests is reliant on how well work was done in the preceding and current steps of the analysis. Similar to how a building is constructed, mistakes and omissions early in the process may negatively affect the final analysis. The first section is about study information. We look at things like the name and purpose of the study, what are the research questions, and there may be research hypotheses that go with those questions. We look at the study design, and we look at any ethics information with this study. We also look at data, how data is collected and how data are handled. The second section deals with dataset information. We look at the variables of the study. We examine data accuracy and if any corrections are made or needed to be made. We look at missing data and if any corrections are need to be made because of missing data. And we look at outliers and if any corrections need to be made because of outliers. Finally, the last section looks at statistical test information. We look at what tests are conducted. We do assumption checks and corrections if they are needed to meet statistical assumptions. And we look at the steps of null hypothesis significance testing. And I list those steps here. And the references that deal with some of this information are listed here in this slide. I would like to just go over some of these, the checklist with you and talk about the different parts that we will be looking at this semester. In the context of this class, many of the sections on the study overall are not going to be looked at in any depth because we're going to be doing a bunch of learning exercises. But we can go ahead and review these questions and answer them in the context of performing learning exercises for a class. So often we will collect some information about who the principal investigator is, and the name of the study. A lot of times, looking at a study and reading about it, the reputation of the investigators do play a role in how the study is received. So sometimes that is important information. We may look at when the study was conducted. We could look at what is the general purpose of the study or analysis. Is this exploratory? Are we confirming a hypothesis? Are we doing this for quality improvement purposes? Or are we just learning? And in this class, the answer for all of our sections as we learn statistical tests is going to be we're doing these for learning. But these do have important considerations because we will learn about test-wise and study-wise error rates and how many tests we conduct on a data set and what we do when we use multiple tests. And also, we look at the generalizability of the results. So because we're doing a bunch of learning exercises, we will have really no generalizability because we're using all fabricated data this semester. So it's good to understand as we are learning what these concepts are, and we can look at it in the context of a learning setting. What are research questions for this study? It's a really good idea to actually write out what questions are you trying to answer, and then evaluate the statistical tests that you're choosing and how well they will or won't answer the study questions that you're trying to get at. It's really easy to lose sight of those research questions as you're digging into an analysis. So sometimes it's quite a good idea to actually have those questions written down so you can refer back to them later when you're trying to decide what tests you should do and how you should go about answering those questions. Sometimes researchers do propose a hypothesis or an anticipated answer for these questions so they can go and compare the answers they received against what they thought was going to happen when they provided a research hypothesis. That's not always done, though, in every study. What is the study design? And we're not going to get into study designs in this course, but the specific study designs do play a role in what kind of inferences you can make from your analyses. I have listed a study design text that I like a lot by Shadish, Cook, and Campbell. Again, if you're going to actually analyze data, it's a good idea to identify a study design because that helps you identify the strengths and weaknesses of a particular study design and what inferences can or can't be drawn by using that study design. And what are IRB status and procedures of a study? And what other ethical considerations are necessary? It's very important, especially with studies dealing with human subjects, that IRB standards and procedures are followed, and any actual research study you read about that deals with people really should mention these. If it doesn't, then it's questionable and something was overlooked. When was the study data collected? And how is the study data collected? Also, in this context of our class, we will be doing learning exercises, so we really won't have that information, but those are good things to consider when looking at analyzing study data to know if a conscientious job was done in the collection and how the data were handled, the data handling procedures. Was care taken in how the data were entered into a data set? Was care taken in how they collected it and kept it safe and secure as they were getting it there? It's good to read data handling procedures from the study. The second section deals with data set information, and these are things that we will look at more closely in this class with all of the analyses that we go over. What variables are in the data set, and what is the level of measurement for each one? Are those set correctly in the data set? So statistical software will let you set the level of measurement, And what level of measurement you have in your variables often determines the statistical procedures that you can conduct using those type of data. So you do want to double check this before running an analysis to make sure that each variable is identified with the correct level of measurement in your data set. The first thing we look at in a data set is data accuracy. Are there any issues? If there are any issues, how will they be addressed? And I do list some things that you could potentially check about a data set. We might look at, do our data types match our levels of measurement that we've identified? Are there any typographical errors in data entry? Do we have any values that don't make sense for the phenomena represented by the variable? An example might be a height of 10 feet. There's very few humans that have ever reached that height, or just really extreme values that may not make much sense. It's a good chance there was a data entry error, and that should be investigated and corrected before you perform an analysis. You can also look at categories that don't make sense for the phenomena represented by the variable. If we're talking about sex with male and female and other, if they have a category of blue in there, that just doesn't make much sense. So it should be examined how that entry was made and if there should be a correction made. And you should be transparent about the decisions and procedures that you take when dealing with these things and record them. Is there any additional data manipulation needed before an analysis? Do any variables need to be reverse coded as part of an instrument? Do summary scores for instruments need to be calculated? Are there any other data transformations that need to be done to meet statistical assumptions? So these are all things that you should note as you are going through for your analysis, so that you can report them when you're writing up results. You should look at missing data and the patterns of missing data and describe any issues and what you're going to do about them. We will not get into the complexities of missing data very much in this course, but be aware that is something important to look at. Describe outliers, and those are extreme values in your data set. Do you have any issues, and what are you going to do about them? And after initial data cleaning and review, have needed descriptive statistics been calculated before proceeding with analysis? What descriptive statistics will be needed for a study report? Often you're going to need to describe continuous variables with means and standard deviations, and categorical variables with counts and percents. Also, there's often going to be, if this involves people, if the study involves people, you're going to look at a participant section, which is often reported in the methods section of a paper following APA guidelines. So those are all good things to look at when looking at the data set. And finally, you're going to have some test-specific information, and we will look at this information for each test that we cover this semester. What statistical tests will be conducted, which variables will be used in those tests, what are the assumptions for a statistical test? So you're going to list out your assumptions and then evaluate, do the data that you have meet those assumptions for each test? And then we're going to learn to follow the null hypothesis significance testing steps for each test. The first step is to state the null and alternative hypothesis. We'll learn what that is and how to do that for each test this semester. We're going to establish a criteria for rejection, the alpha level, and typically that's 0.05, and we will discuss why that is and when that may be different over the course of this semester. We're going to calculate a test statistic, and we'll learn what that is for each test. We will draw conclusions about the null hypothesis. We will cover how to make that decision and what it is for each test this semester. We'll conduct post hoc analyses, if any. Some tests you can do some follow-up analyses to understand the information better, and we'll learn what that is on the tests we cover this semester. And finally, you will report your results. And I did include the references here on the checklist. We will use this as we go through our assignments this semester to help us remember important steps. As I said, most of the study information is going to be that we're doing this for learning, and these things are not generalizable. So we won't really have much specific information on the study information, but the data set and the test information we will be going over for each of our examples this semester. I hope this helps give you an overview of the data analysis process, and some things that I think are important to remember is you're analyzing data, especially after you finish this course and may have data of your own that needs analysis. And I look forward to working with you for the rest of the semester.